Cinematek voor deze vertoning van Beauty and the Right to the Ugly van Wendelien van Oldenborg. Een film die wij presenteren in het kader van ons programma ter nagedachtenis van de Belgische cameraman SÉBASTIEN KOEPPEL. En het doet ons dus ook veel plezier om in het kader van dat programma ook nieuwe films te kunnen voorstellen, zoals de film van vanavond. De vertoning zal gevolgd worden door een Q&A met Wendelin, die u gebracht wordt door Anna Manoubens, en dat zal in het Engels plaatsvinden, dus blijf zeker zitten na de film voor een gesprek met de regisseuse. Donc, bienvenue à Cinematek pour cette séance de Beauty and the Right to the Ugly de Wendelien van Oldenborg, un film qu'on présente dans le cadre de notre programme dédié à Sébastien Koeppel, caméraman belge décédé bien trop tôt. Et ça nous fait aussi beaucoup plaisir dans ce cadre de ce programme de pouvoir encore montrer des nouveaux films. Voilà. Le film sera suivi d'un Q&A avec Wendelin, un Q&A par Anna Manoubens en anglais ou en français, on verra. Et voilà, maintenant je laisse la parole à Wendelin. Donc, mais restez donc surtout dans la salle pour le Q&A après la séance. Mais maintenant je laisse la parole à Wendelin.
Merci. I will continue in English, I'm afraid, which will be the same language as the Q&A. Thank you all very much for coming. It's extremely exciting to show this very first screening here. And I especially want to thank August Orts for the invitation to produce a work with them. I won't make any name mentioning because it will go a bit too far. I want to also really make a special thanks to Sébastien, who was a very big part of this project. And I think it might be useful to say a few words just before, after we have the Q&A, but just to introduce a little bit what you can expect to see, and that is that the protagonist of this movie is a building, and this building is called Het Karagat. That name you will probably hear quite a few times in the screening. And this building was an experiment, as much a social experiment as it was an architectural experiment, built in '74 in Eindhoven. And I think it's just an attempt to see what this architecture might have brought, or how this architecture might show something of a zeitgeist or a thought of the moment that we can read through seeing it now, but we see some kind of time span coming by between a moment in the 70s and a moment now, and it might just give a bit more light on the now. So just with that in mind, perhaps you will find out soon enough what the building was about, and we can talk about it much later. Have a good screening. Is there anything you want to say? No. Anna's been involved with the film from right at the beginning, so we had a kind of conversation, I think, a deep conversation throughout.
Fully so pretending.
We're kind of continuing our conversation here, I believe. Because I haven't spoken to her since she's seen the film, so I think this is it. So the beginning, indeed, the title is completely stolen by me from Lina Bobardi, who is maybe many of you know, she's an Brazilian architect. She's an Italian architect who has done most of her career in Brazil. And she has made an exhibition in, I think it's '84, and the exhibition is called Beauty or the Right to the Ugly. Now there were several reasons why I was looking. Actually, this building by Frank van Klungeren came to my attention by looking at her work and trying to figure out how this relationship with Europe would have been for her. Like, she was an Italian, and she was obviously also all the things that she's been doing in Brazil are very specific to Brazil, and they're very contextual based, but they have also very clearly a contact with an European avant-garde thought that I was just trying to figure out, like, you know, what would it have been, how backwards and forwards, like, as a thought that would have been around. And then I don't know, I was just looking at the region here, and then via her architecture, I sort of came to think about the Constance, New Babylon, and I thought, yeah, that's actually rather close. You know, I mean, I would have to talk more about her architecture, but let's just assume that was rather close. And then through thinking about Constance New Babylon, actually soon enough you find out, yeah, that was a period in the Netherlands that there was an aim to start building that New Babylon. And that's also a very interesting kind of political moment where there is an intention to bring those thoughts, to bring those quite abstract avant-garde thoughts into a reality. And it was possible. So there were some people in administrative positions, like in the city council of Eindhoven, who could say, yeah, we would want to make architecture that, you know, would have some kind of function in changing behavior of people, changing the nature of social relationships. And so that's why I found it really fascinating to see that this happened in the Netherlands, where there was an authority telling to a people, like, let's try this, you know. So it was like top-down initiation of experiment, or saying, you know, it just feels like more, it could have been something that grows out of a group of people wanting to live like that, but it was actually the other way around. They were looking for this group, and then also looking for the people who might set up the school. We have some of the school specialists here in the room. So this was a very particular story, I think. And so for me that was really interesting to see that the moment in the Netherlands particularly was like that, that from authority was an initiation of a particular experiment, and then what happened to that. Ask them. Well, of course, maybe it's interesting to explain how I do that. I mean, I go into this situation trying to find out who's there and find out who was, you know, who is there now, who is interested in that building, who was there, anybody that has been in touch with that building. I kind of started to get to know, and it is really a range from people who were there right at the beginning. I mean, I think it's clear from the film, until like architects that are doing the renovation plans right now, they were also there, and of course these anti-squat inhabitants, which is very important as a kind of a new usage. I wanted to actually say something in between, before I go on with answering that question. What is really interesting to me is that the architecture that was proposed at the time was also some kind of minimal architecture, in the sense of, not of minimalism, but actually in the sense of not giving much architecture. Frank van Klingeren actually did say, like, okay, I give little architecture so that the usage will fill in the rest. So, you know, the place would be shaped by its usage. So when I encountered it in, you know, a couple of years ago, and I found all these walls, I actually thought, well, if the usage means that the walls are built, then that's part of the plan. But then actually through getting to know the situation better, it was clear that these walls were built by a particular user and not by another one. So you had also because it was very variedly used, you did have different wishes, and as you could maybe feel from a lot of the response from people, that most of the people didn't really want those walls. So, but there was a kind of a reading that I had at the beginning, because I thought, well, if that's the result of the user sort of led developments, and that's it. You can't really say much about it. Anyway, that's just in between. But then in terms of what do I expect from people, I don't know. I mean, in this case, what we have done is we've set up 3 shoots. And one was just to expect something from the building, which was we were trying to portray this building, trying to make this building filmed. And the second shoot was the public film shoot that you saw. You know, once in a while you see the poster passing. That was a call for people to join in, and I had prepared some people and invited various people very deliberately. But it was also this open situation that I had no idea exactly how things would develop. So most of the conversations, most of these spontaneous conversations, they come out of that day, really, you know, always to my surprise to a certain extent. Of course, I set up some questions, and I set up some groups and people to specifically meet each other, but still their conversation is totally not guided. And then the third shoot was actually something that's a little bit new also in my method. That with some of the participants, with some of the people that were, you know, more actively involved in the whole of the process, I tried to set up other things, like other moments that came out of what I understood of how they were there. And some, you know, some have really written much more into that, you know, have written their scenes more or less, or sort of made it, or it's come really out of the reading, out of understanding what that moment, what these people have and have had or have now with that building, and how that could express. So these 3 shoots have been cut together in a not sort of like that, obviously. So they feed all into the this piece that now is kind of more built up around 3 chapters. So it's quite 3 distinct chapters.
And then, because there is of course the wall kind of both as a constraint but also as a kind of ongoing fantasy. When you get to the middle of the film, you see it break down. It's like finally, because you struggle to orient and get a sense of the space, and so you're. But then I want to connect that with another sentence by, I don't remember the name again, but he says that living there in the 70s and 80s, he learned to work without limits.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I think it's the idea that he talks about limit has to do with the physical limit, but also to working without limits as a kind of durational thing. Like I work full time, and they trace. I mean, his comment plus the anti-squat as kind of ever-working building that is profitable, or
exactly,
the creative labor that is done there, and the team building, which is a kind of business take on commonality, generates kind of a different genealogy or way of
totally, because actually one of my intentions was also to look at that moment in the 70s not as a contrast, but as a kind of, indeed, like what kind of continuous lines you can follow, and that comes out rather soon, especially through that one character that you just mentioned, who was there as a teenager and set up all these things, and then he went on to become this director of businesses that wanted to go into flex work, and he's become this counselor for business that wanted to organize flex work, and he sees it as a total continuation from his knowledge being there. So that's a kind of a nice line, and I also thought about this anti-squat living being, and as a kind of a lifestyle that relates fairly closely to the lifestyle of those people in the 70s, how they would live together. There's a kind of an atmosphere of a party-like atmosphere, and some freeness in how you live, the alternative way of living,
while at the same time being completely different.
Yeah, but that's what I mean, exactly. There was a kind of a connection in the lifestyle, but the reason why it is like that is completely different, and the conditions under which it is done are completely different. Although there is also something interesting, but as I said before, because it was also proposed by the authorities in the first place, it's also a little bit different than, I think, a group that set something up for itself, which is also that relates very closely for me to how the school was done and not done, because the school experiment is also a very interesting story in a certain sense. They built this idea of the school without walls, the open school, and it was an idea that was really big in the 70s, that existed and people did it, and actually, funnily enough, in Brazil they have done it pretty seriously also in that time, and also recurringly now. But the idea that you can set up a school that has a closer relationship to society, that was really the meaning of it. Having the school there, having the supermarket there, and the kids, and the library there, so the kids could learn via all these routes and seeing the life going on. So you're very close to society. But however, the same authorities that proposed that never made sure that it would function at all, because there was no intention. I'm sure there were groups of people at the time that would have liked to set up such a school, and they were probably busy with that type of educational thoughts or pedagogical thoughts, because all the writing was around. But they just said, here's the school, and plunked then some already existing school into it. And you heard the result, and we can ask the witnesses also. Like, it's very difficult if you come out of a situation that you just you're used to giving these lessons in classes, and there's a structure like this, and then suddenly this only here is the space, and now do it. And instead, and I'm actually, I have an idea that maybe there would have been people that would have liked to have taken it on seriously. So there's also something that's a big question for me. Like, what is it to put an experiment there if in a way you're not interested in doing the experiment, or if there's no seriousness about following that experiment. It was a place where a lot of music was exposed, what do you say, played and performed, but also created. There were even some bands come from that period, and I kind of, so that was already existing, and so I had a really big desire to put musical element in it, but nothing really came out in this in a very natural way, in something that was really storytelling or could also tap into it. And I thought at a certain moment it's kind of interesting to get a more contemporary view, and indeed ask somebody that I actually know quite well to come in, you know, from his contemporary Dutchness and comment on it, or watch it and see it. And actually Romeo, who wrote the spoken word lyrics, he is somebody that understands such a situation quite well, you know, quite immediate, and he got on really well with Hans, our main protagonist, because they're kind of similar characters, and then they just started to make this music together. So I thought that was quite an interesting way, and I was quite happy with his lyrics, and decided later that that was kind of become some kind of framework. I was not really planning that so much, but it just became that because he tells it so well. And also I think his commentary is quite important in a certain way, that it's him who comments like that, to say that he kind of understands what, like when he says what's something like experimenteel, sociaal, and now neoliberal, you know, like it's kind of interesting immediacy of how to understand the situation. Kind of cynical, not cynical, but skeptical towards that moment of the 70s, because there is indeed a tendency to say, oh yeah, then it was all, you know, indeed socially driven and also very political. Still people were politically much more aware than now, and it sort of hasn't had this, indeed you could be nostalgic to that, but I actually didn't believe that, so I set off trying to find the opposite anyway. So I think that was kind of maybe it was a safe journey to not fall into, but of course, I mean, in the meantime, you also, when you see pictures of the building from when it was built, and it looks a lot nicer than how it looks now. But then again, I mean, what I also hang on to all the time with this title is The Ride to the Ugly is to me also an interesting ride, you know, it's like I don't know exactly what it means, but I know what it means for Bilina Babadi, by the way, but we can talk about that later, because it's a class thing, obviously. But it's something that I also still wanted to pursue, like, it's something, indeed, maybe it is to do with that same class thing, but it's difficult to, maybe after a while I could formulate it a bit better. But it's hovering somewhere there. Not so young, actually. They didn't appear. So the youngest one is this guy who became a counselor for Flexwork, because he was about 15 when he lived there. So not the ones that were born really and raised as was, you know, this character at the end was telling that maybe it was terrible for them. Well, no, actually, but I went a little bit. Yeah, I didn't meet them, so they didn't appear. But Hans always says proudly about his kids. So Hans is the guy with the ponytail. He always says about his kids that they loved it and that it was just a fantastic time, which you kind of can imagine. It was a bit of a fun time to run around there freely and climb over tables, as the teachers were saying, and have that time. I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to. Actually, one teacher that I also spoke to, who's much younger, he went to school there but that was already a bit later, in the 90s. Erik Wiersma. But he said that it was kind of normal for him. It was nothing so particular. So I don't know. I also know one person who lived in the neighborhood next door to it. So there is it's bordering on another neighborhood, which is very working class and very Catholic. And she was not allowed to go there whatsoever as a child. Like she was not allowed to make friends there or anything. It was just
How many people live there?
It was 3,000 people in the neighborhood, 4,000 people in the neighborhood. In the building, nobody lived in the building. It's a community center. So in the building, you'd have the supermarket, the doctor, the school, the communal area, the library, and some shops and a bank, and the medical center. So it was like all the amenities that you need in a neighborhood. They were just covered by a roof and put in the same place. And the architect sort of said that he wanted the conversation or the contact between all these different functions to be completely open. And actually his motto is irritation, so like contact through irritation, so you have to negotiate the thing. Well, it was pretty irritating because the noise level was pretty amazing. One of the major sort of first changes that were made were to do with the noise level. It's true, because I didn't really set out to analyze, you know, the building and its kind of complete set of proposals. It was, for me, it was really the building itself and the inside, and therefore this labyrinthic feeling just stayed like that. So I only pull out at the end to overview a bit what it was. But you're right, there is of course, the neighborhood was also built with this generosity of greenery and space, which now, yeah, has its own function. Yeah, I think I just didn't take it in actually as a part of it. There are many shots, and because that's exactly what it is. It's such a strange space that you don't really get really get a sense of what goes to what. That's where before you would look through the whole building, and therefore there's many shots that I have of people saying, and behind there was this, and behind there was that, and so on. So that was also my idea of, I mean, that just happened because people say that, you know, and it's what you feel the whole time. When you come there first, you also think, like, you walk in and you think, where is, you know, you walk into a wall basically, and then you think, what's behind this wall? And then you walk around the building, you couldn't even imagine what was where you were standing before. It's quite difficult.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Just everybody's invited to have a drink in the foyer, I think.